Hello and welcome. As you can tell, it's going to be jovial and happy and fun and all of that stuff. Welcome to tonight's event in the 2012 Sagan National Colloquium. As you may know, this year's colloquium is titled Bite, Examining the Mutually Transformative Relationship Between People and Food. And the series continues until November 14th. So please check the schedule. We've got great events happening all the way up until that point. Hopefully you noticed there's some things around. I know some people were scooping up some ice cream and enjoying that. And there's other things as well for you to engage in that'll be available as well after the event. So please feel free to check that out after. We also have you may have noticed some shirts outside of the event. These are just $10. They benefit the Ohio Wesleyan Early Childhood Center. They're building a learning garden where parents, teachers, and children are working with master gardeners here in Delaware to help connect them with their food. So it's a great project, and I encourage you to check that out. My name is Chris Fink. I'm a faculty member in the Department of Health and Human Kinetics here at Ohio Wesleyan, and I'm also the director of the Colloquium this year. Tonight's event is, I was telling the panelists earlier over dinner, really a gem of an event. It's one of the most exciting for me. Something I've been looking forward to and looking forward to including in the program since I started considering the events. There's so much happening really here in Central Ohio relative to good, clean, fair food and local food, and I felt it was absolutely critical to highlight that during the series. So tonight's panelist and moderator are really great examples of this momentum. If you were here for Joel Salatin, I believe he called it a local food tsunami, and I think that's descriptive of what might be happening here. He evocatively put that last Thursday evening. If you were here, our panelists will have a chance to be introduced in a minute and talk about their work during the event. But I did want to introduce our moderator for tonight. Our moderator is Tricia Wheeler. Tricia is the publisher and editor-in-chief of Edible Columbus magazine, which is an independently owned, community-based publication devoted to connecting its readers with the local food community. I actually, throughout this series, was kind of looking at different descriptors, but the statement that you have on the website is just amazing. From the farmers to the distributors to our local artisans, entrepreneurs, and leaders, this is about Edible Columbus. We aim to make all partners in the local food chain empowered and engaged in the building of a true local food system. Very nice, I thought, and descriptive of what we're trying to do tonight even. On top of her wonderful work with Edible Columbus, Tricia is also a local entrepreneur, a classically studied chef. She graduated top in her class in the French Culinary Institute in New York City. She's passionate about the joys of home cooking and entertaining and teaches a popular cooking series in that great city just south of us, Columbus, Ohio. So please welcome me in joining Tricia Wheeler to the microphone for tonight's event.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay? I have a soft voice, so. Okay, I'm so happy to be here tonight. Thank you to Ohio Wesleyan and Chris Fink for having the foresight to put together such a wonderful colloquium focused on something I think is so important to all of us. Tonight, we get an opportunity to talk about making local food work in Ohio, entrepreneurship and local food. If I used one word to describe myself besides wife and mother, I would say entrepreneur. So this subject is so near and dear to my heart. So the topic that we're going to get to talk about is entrepreneurial perspectives tonight on our local food system from 4 amazing members of our community who I'm so honored to have joined here at this panel tonight. They're Ohio ambassadors whose work shines brightly, not only in our own community, but sometimes on the national stage. Their dedication to their craft, their land, is inspiring, and I could use only one word to sum up how I would describe all 4 of these members of our panel tonight, and that's passionate. Instead of reading lengthy bios tonight, I'm going to give you a brief background on each panelist and then ask them to tell us in their own words about their beginnings and why they do what they do. So tonight, ladies first. I'm so pleased to introduce you to Jeni Britton Bauer. Jeni is the proprietress of Jeni's Ice Cream, James Beard-winning cookbook author, and the artist behind what I would argue is the best ice cream being produced in our country. Jeni, can you take a few minutes to tell us how and why you started Jeni's and what your vision was in the early days?
Yes, I will. Hello. Thanks, Tricia. I started my business 10 years ago in 2002, so we'll be 10 years old on November 15th. I started in the North Market in Columbus, where, have you guys been to the North Market? All roads in Columbus lead to the North Market. Just get on any one of them, you'll get there. The market is a community of flavor. And I started making ice cream there and was just inspired by what was going on there. So of course what was growing, what the people were bringing in, what the merchants were bringing in, but also the seasonality of the market and the seasonality of ingredients and the emotion of the season. So I just started making ice cream with what was around me. And that's what we do to this day. We build relationships with the people that we buy from, and that all came from the North Market for me. So as we grew our business, we grew the exact same way that I've always done, and work with the same farmers now, 10 years in, that we've been working with for a long time, and some new ones too. We have 10 stores. We have 8 in Columbus, 1 in Chagrin Falls up by Cleveland, and 1 in Nashville now. We make all of our ice creams in our kitchens. We work with Snowville Creamery, which is a wonderful boutique dairy, to make all of our ice creams. It's all grass-pastured milk. We will, I would say actually 65% of every ingredient or everything in our ice creams is directly derived from Ohio agriculture. That's not including other Ohio ingredients like Stauf's coffee, cream of peanut butter, and all of the other artisans that we work with. This is directly derived from the dirt of Ohio. We'll spend about $3 million, and it's probably more this year, with Ohio farms and farmers and producers from that. Other ingredients, of course, we're working with international suppliers and growers, but we take that local philosophy and apply it to some of our international suppliers as well, including our chocolate suppliers, growers, and vanilla bean, and we're working on sugar right now, trying to get it directly from farms. So that's kind of our sort of core philosophy, and it all started right here.
That's great, Jeni. So I'm going to introduce to you next Ben Sippel. He's an Ohio boy who attended and graduated from his father's alma mater, Ohio Wesleyan. Ben came to a career in agriculture after working on farms during college to fulfill a graduation requirement for his environmental and geography major. Today, Ben works at the Sippel family farm with his wife Lisa and their 2 children. The 77-acre farm they own in Morrow County provides community-supported agricultural shares for 150 families and crops to sell at local farmers markets. In 2009, they began to build the first sheep dairy and Farmstead Creamery in Ohio. Their creamery is now producing award-winning cheeses. Ben, I'm sure it's not hard to remember being back here and thinking about what you were going to do as your life's work. Can you take us back and tell us about the early decision to become a farmer and some of the reasons why this was important to you?
Yeah, thank you. As Tricia just said, I attended Ohio Wesleyan. I spent many fond hour upon hour in Stewart Hall, which is now the new Science Center, spending many hours in rooms without windows, which is ironic. Do we have any environmental studies majors here? Come on. Okay. It's ironic that you take environmental studies classes in a room with no windows. It's hard to tie into your environment when you're surrounded by cinder block walls. But throughout my time here at OWU, every class you take in environmental studies, and for all intents and purposes, through a lot of classes you might take here, all the time you hear about it's agriculture's fault, whether it be loss of biodiversity, soil loss, loss of plants, loss of animals. Think of all the issues that in an environmental studies course you would hear about, and they always seem to point to agriculture. Well, as has been alluded to with local food, the one thing that every single person in this room has in common, there might be some other ones, but we all eat. And we won't be sitting in this room talking about local food if we don't eat before we show up here. And so while sitting through plenty of Dr. Hickox's lectures, There's some laughs there. I have to share. I fondly remember getting exams back in Dr. Hickox's class as he stumbled into class and said, "Ooh, I'm sure feeling anemic today because I just bled all over those exams." But that's what I loved about my OWU experience. But as you talk about local food, it's one of those issues that we need to address. How are we going to feed people on this planet? So the long and short of it is that's how I got involved in agriculture, figuring what better way than to do it than farm. So.
Great, thanks, Ben. So I'm pleased to introduce you to Warren. He describes himself as a dairy nerd. After a career consulting in all aspects of the dairy business, from processing to distribution, marketing, and consumption, Warren is now on his second act. In 2007, he started Snowville Creamery. Here, he bottles his neighbors' locally, sustainably raised, grass-fed dairy cow's milk. Warren started by supplying milk to his Athens neighbors. Now he supplies many of us our milk. You can find Snowville in Whole Foods across the state, in many grocery stores, and in Washington, D.C. Warren is also passionate about changing the way our current government policies are written. He's an advocate for pushing America toward the sustainable production of food for all. Warren, I know you've invested so much of yourself in Snowville. Can you take us back and tell us why you decided to start a creamery?
I think that, for me, I grew up in the 50s and 60s. And it's hard to explain to some of the younger people in this room the world that I grew up in, because we were eternally optimistic and we intended to bring everyone into the same prosperity and happiness that we enjoyed in this country. In 1968, I was working in a TB hospital in Port-au-Prince, Haiti. Wasn't everybody?
Long dramatic pause.
I think that, the 40 years since then have been for those of us who were there then, who participated in the civil rights movement, who participated in the anti-war movement, who participated in the environmental movement. Those of us who are of this age, we look back and, in fact, we're horrified at what we see. For me, I grew up in a family where milk was revered. My father ran the National Dairy Products Judging Contest, I know you've never heard of it, for 20 years, because he had the ability with his tongue in his mouth to discern good milk from bad milk and really good milk from mediocre milk or even good milk. Do you know why you close your eyes when you kiss?
Why?
Because there's a lot going on. And we need to learn to close our eyes when we eat our food, which we can't do if we're driving an automobile or watching television. And when we get to the point in this nation where we kiss while we're driving automobiles and watching television, God help us all.
Fantastic.
So I think that the connection with food is something so primal and so basic. I believe that until we reach puberty and we get to know the touch of another person, the most comforting thing that we can have is a glass of milk that reminds us of where we came from and where we started and what was so extraordinary to us. And I think that we've robbed the last 3 generations in this country of that experience, because when I stand in a Whole Foods store in Washington, D.C., and I'm absolutely in the minority as being a white person, people come up to me and the tears run down their face when they taste our milk, and they say, I haven't tasted milk like this since I left home. I didn't know there was such a thing as bad milk until I came to America. I built a creamery because I was so mad with what American capitalism and agriculture had done to a food so important, so sacred, so universal. We are all here because of milk. I want to make you at least a little bit mad tonight, because we've got a whole bunch of work to do. I built a creamery to prove that we were on the wrong course. How many people here think that we're on the right course? So your problem is you wonder what to do. You can't build a creamery. You know, that was my privilege, but then I'm 60 and you're not. So what can you do? I'm not here to tell you, but I'm here to tell you that you're here at this institution and you're here at this talk tonight to figure it out. And if you can't get excited enough to go to Port-au-Prince and work in a TB hospital, or work in the civil rights movement, or work in the anti-war movement, find something to do that you have a passion for that matters, because otherwise your time here will be wasted. And you've got a lot more of it than I do. So for me, I grew up on Olentangy River Road, straight down 315, not too far from here. And when my father got out of Dairy Tech School in 1953, he ran Deer Lick Dairy that was right here across from Bud's right here in Delaware. My earliest childhood memories are right here in this very town. So you folks may imagine what a striking thing it is for me to come here. What do I have to say to you? What do I want you to take away from here? That food is sacred. It's been sacred for all of humanity. And we're living at a moment in time when it's not. This moment too will pass. You know the king that wanted a new truth-sayer? He brought them in and he interviewed them. And he said, I want you to tell me something that will always be true. Finally, one of them said, this too will pass.
Thanks, Warren.
So get ready for the future where it passes.
See why I love my panel? Michael Jones is the Executive Director of Local Matters and the owner of the Greener Grocer, located in Columbus at also the historic North Market. Michael graduated from Chapel Hill with a degree in public health and studied to be a chef at the Culinary Institute in Hyde Park. Michael has been a passionate advocate for strengthening our local food system and for providing equal access for all community members to local, affordable, and healthy foods. Michael, tell us about the mission of Local Matters and the Greener Grocer and what life experiences brought you to this work.
Well, good evening and thank you. I do want to talk to the moderator at the end of this about the fact that I got the short straw to follow Warren Taylor here on the panel.
Somebody had to be.
Because how could you top that? So the thing that's intriguing to me about my fellow panelists, and I would say I've had the good fortune of being here for several of these speeches thus far in this series, and by the way, it's just phenomenal. I mean, I don't know what a privilege. Yeah. And a big shout out to Dr. Fink for putting this together, because you're getting some exposure to some pretty incredible people, for another 6 to 8 weeks here. But point to me of all of this is so much of what this is about is our story. And it's really our stories that in a lot of ways, to me, connect us to our passion. And it's really our stories that connect us to our food. And then it's really our food that connects us to many of these really big picture issues that I think we're going to talk about tonight. So it's like, pick one. You can pick health, you can pick economics, you can pick environment, whatever. One way or another, they all come back to food. And better yet, they come back around to our food system. And that word, food system, is something I know that we'll probably talk a lot about tonight, and it's really pretty simple. If you think about it, it's just everything from, what goes in the ground to grow to how it's processed, transported, distributed, ends up on your plate, and then what do we do with it at the end. That's the food system, and it's a whole bunch of other stuff in between. For me personally, my story is many stories. I had the privilege of growing up on a farm as a kid in North Carolina, a tobacco farm. So I was 5, and my grandfather said, "Hey, you're 5, you're walking, you can work." So I got the wake-up call at 5 a.m. to go out and gather eggs on the farm. So that was sort of my first experience, and really my first connection to food and my first passion with food. I went on to Chapel Hill, North Carolina, to the School of Public Health. And really my passion and my story really became health, and to some extent the environment, and how it was, how food affected those two things. While I was in college, I also had 2 housemates, both of whom were chefs. So it was a great way to make some extra dollars, which was to work in the restaurant with them. And so I ended up, after graduating from college, working in the health field with my degree for all of about 6 months, and really decided restaurants were a whole lot more fun. So I ended up migrating in that direction and became a chef. And from there, food and connections to farms and so forth, that really became, my passion and my story. But really sort of what led me here to Local Matters and the work that we do in my involvement in the Greener Grocer was the fact that 6.5 years ago, when my wife was pregnant with our daughter, I'm 55 now, so I only waited, late in life to get all those things started. So I was doing a lot of reading because I decided if you're going to wait until you're 48 to have a kid, you better not screw it up too much. So I was reading an article one evening, and I came across this quote that said, "My daughter's generation is going to be the first ever whose life expectancy is thought to be less than my own." And that really jarred me, and I was still kind of in the restaurant side of the world and connected with farmers and so forth. But I remember showing that to my wife and saying, "Would you mind taking a look at this, because this has got to be a misprint. This is a country where every generation lives longer than their parents. So you're telling me that my daughter, who is yet to be born, is going to live a shorter lifespan than my own." And when I discovered that that was true, it really set me in a whole different direction. So my passion and my story really came about, I want to be a part of helping to figure this out, because something isn't working. And the more I delved into it, the more I discovered that so many of the issues that I think many of us are passionate about really are in one way or another connected to food, and specifically to the food system. So my challenge to all of you is probably very similar to Warren's, which is each of you have a story, I'm sure of it. So what I would encourage you to do is, what's your story? What's your passion relative to food and this big thing called the food system? And really at the end of the day, when you figure that out and you figure out which of those big picture issues are passions of yours and connected to the food system, what are you going to do about it? Because frankly, all of us up here, we need your passion and we need your energy. I was here for the Monsanto talk on Monday night. Anybody here for that particular talk? I'm going to be blunt. I was pretty amazed that all of you in the room who were here didn't stand up and go, I hope I can say this, bullshit. I cannot believe that, some
Maybe
of
they're just polite, Michael. They could be learning something here.
That's not our generation.
Sorry.
My point in all of this is, I think there's a lot of things that are spoken relative to food, and there's a lot of different conversations that are happening. Each of us has to find our own truth in that. But at the end of the day, I think if all of this is going to work, all of this being this food system stuff, it's really going to take your passion and energy to make that happen.
Great, thank
That's all I
you.
got.
Thank you. This is a great start to our evening. So I'm going to start here with a question for Ben. At Edible, we always say we want farmers to be as well known as rock stars. We know farmers work really hard, and there are real concerns about older generations of farmers retiring. Ben, can you give us your perspective on how you've been able to make a living farming? I know this is a concern that aspiring young farmers have, and how do you make the economics on a family farm work?
Well,
Is that a big question?
that's a
We're going right there.
huge question. And frankly, as Lisa and I were talking to prepare for tonight, she said that really the only frank answer to that question is barely. And I will be, we are at a Methodist school. I will be the voice crying from the wilderness that local food needs to stay on track. I have been in local food my whole adult life. I graduated from here in 2002. I had worked on farms for 2 years before that. Local food needs to stay on track. And what do I mean by that? One, we need farmers. And I will say that whether you go to an organization like OFA or PASA or any number of state organic sustainable agricultural organizations, or whether you go to the polar opposite, the Ohio Farm Bureau, the one thing that binds all those groups together is farmers are getting old. Now I'm 32, and Lisa and I also joked that being mic'd, I could hold the microphone to my knee to show that I am getting to be an old 32-year-old. And so I digress a little bit. I'm a farmer. Farmers, we just talk. And I'm definitely more comfortable at the side of a pickup. Like standing at the back of a pickup is a more comfortable place for a farmer to talk. Definitely not in front of this.
You're doing a good job.
Thanks. But I've been at many organizations where I say, I want a peer group. I want to go to farm organizations in 10 years and have some of you in the audience. The periphery of local food is great, but we need people who come to speak on panels and worry whether they're going to smell like manure or whether they're going to have dirt on their pants. I do have dirt on my pants, by the way, because I can't leave the farm without getting dirty. So working on a farm where you pay for the farm with what you produce is a very difficult challenge. Every month I need to make a certain amount of money in order to pay my mortgage, in order to pay for my equipment, in order to pay for the people that work for me. And as this is the night of potentially the first freeze, the weatherman notwithstanding, I could stand to lose $10,000 to $30,000 tonight on several degrees, whether it be 2 degrees, 3 degrees, 4 degrees. That shift could be whether I plow under a lot of beautiful vegetables or whether I get to harvest them and sell them for the next 4 weeks. That, in a nutshell, is what agriculture is all about. Dr. Hickox often said, farming is the only form of legalized gambling in many states. That has changed in Ohio just recently. But that is, on a farm, simply put, if something breaks, you fix it. If something needs to be done, you do it. If your sheep get out in the middle of the night, you put them back. If a coyote gets in with your sheep in the middle of the night, you take care of it. A sick animal, lambs, produce, a greenhouse cover rips off like it did this year, that happens. I lost 24 apple trees that I'd taken care of for 7 years this year in that windstorm. This was the first year of fruit, gone. That is local food. That is the system that we all need to participate in. So
Maybe you should talk about some of the upsides. Because maybe we can come back to that.
Indeed, I very much like what I do. And life on the farm is a challenge. To me, it is the ultimate extension of the liberal arts education. because the farmer is the biologist, the agronomist, the weed ecologist, the sociologist. Especially when you're a direct market farm, you are a sociologist. It is the ultimate interdisciplinary vocation. And so as far as the upside, that is the main upside. It is a challenge each and every day. There are things growing up in Columbus, Ohio, as a child of privilege. My dad's a retired Methodist minister. I never thought I could do. And there are things that I now do. I can assist a ewe lambing, no biggie. And that is what we've heard about of intellectual curiosity, getting passionate about what you want. You have to, as you are sitting here, you have to find something that lights your fire. Because if you don't, it's going to be a miserable adulthood. We'll come back to the positive side. Some days I'm a glass half full, some days I'm a glass half empty. I think I actually had the enormous opportunity to go head to head with some Monsanto Dow people at a symposium about Roundup resistant and the next generation crops last year. And it's that fire. Actually, after I went to that conference, I was like, my fire is back. But we'll come back. I want to tinge everything with reality. Is we can't constantly be doing like, we're doing a great job. We've got so much more to do. That's what we need to say. Okay.
That's a good.
I'll mumble forever.
This is a good point to ask Jeni and Warren. You need each other. Both of your businesses have thrived in part because of your relationship to one another. Jeni, can you describe for the audience the relationship between Jeni's Ice Cream and Snowville? And then Warren, can you describe what this partnership has meant to your creamery?
We're married. I actually do describe it that way a lot. I mean, I think our companies are married, and Warren and I are too, in somewhere.
Yes. It's fine.
When I started making ice cream in 1996, I thought it would be really easy to source local milk, or just really good milk. I mean, it's Ohio. We're a top 5 dairy state. I had heard that, at Ohio State where I was. I thought we could just go up to any dairy, and I was 22, so I didn't know very much about ice cream or about dairy. I thought you could just walk up to a dairy. I drove by them all the time on my way anywhere in Ohio, and there's all those grass pastured cows and quaint farms, and I thought I could just walk up and knock on their door, basically, and I'm going to make ice cream out of out of the milk. That is so far from actually what's the truth of the dairy system. Not only can you not do that, you can't get single farmed or single sourced dairy, and especially at the time, you couldn't even make ice cream. So I started from then just going through every door, finding anyone who talked to me about dairy, who knew a dairy farmer, who knew anyone in the dairy business. I called them. I went and visited them for years until we did finally find an organic dairy in Utica that we started working with family that were only sourcing from family farms, organic dairy farms. They went out of business, then somebody else came in and took them over, and meanwhile, when they go out of business, we're going to Kentucky to find dairy because for whatever reason we couldn't get just Ohio dairy. I mean, it was weird, or that quality that I was looking for. The new one comes in, then they go out of business. Meanwhile, I hear about Warren Taylor, and it's just another door that I'm going through. I was at Ohio State talking about dairy, using cultures to thicken dairy products or whatever. He's like, you should talk to this crazy guy down in Athens named Warren Taylor. So we did. So I don't know, when I was 2000, must have been, it was 2007 because I was pregnant with Greta. Very, very, very pregnant with Greta, 10 months pregnant. I went down there and Warren's feeding me raw milk. And so we were talking about these dairy cultures because we were really excited. I had this idea that we would thicken ice cream with the, by sort of culturing the dairy or whatever. And so he's like, oh, yeah, I got to show you this. And he pulled out in a non-air conditioned room these big ball jars on the top of his refrigerator. He's like, you gotta try this. And it was like gel, like white gel. And I didn't know how long they'd been up there or whatever. And he's like eating it, he's like, it's completely flavorless. It's awesome. And like, we could do so much with this. Like, he'd already been working on this whole thing and everything. And I was really excited about it, but I did not want to eat it. But of course it's Warren. And he's like, whatever. So of course I'm like, yeah, it's great. You know? But
It was fresh from the day before, I assure you.
you know, dairies all dairies are in this sort of same situation. I don't know. 50 years ago, 30 years ago, during the last century, there were like 8,000 dairies in the United States. Each one of them made ice cream because they had milk. As soon as they started putting skim milk out on the market and 2% milk, they had extra cream left over. And so even in Columbus and in every single market, you could find several different local ice creams. Now, I mean, they weren't really good ice creams. When they would run out of dairy fat, maybe they'd substitute vegetable fat and, you know, whatever. But still, everyone had to make ice cream because they had all this cream left over. And so I thought, well, Warren's got to have some of this cream left over. What's he doing with it? And so anyway, that's how we got connected. Now Warren and down at the creamery, they have a batch pasteurizer that's just for our ice cream, and it actually, we add the sugar right there and cook the ice cream right on the farm. We start with raw milk, and we have this great, and Warren's a very innovative person, so it's been awesome how we've achieved this beautiful ice cream that is unlike any other ice cream because of this amazing partnership that we have, not just in flavor, but also Warren just being such a smart guy. I love
That's
you.
good. That was good, Jeni.
I love that Jeni describes it as a marriage, because I think that this is really where our food comes from. You know, you think about the connectedness that's required for a community to grow, share food and all. You know, I have to confess that Jeni completely charmed me the first time we met immediately, because I recognized someone who was so interested in the food, in the experience of the food. And I don't get to meet a lot of people like that necessarily. And
Let me add, Warren did not want to work with us, by the way, either. Like, ice cream was so far away from what he wanted to do. He's all about health and creating healthy milk. And I wouldn't say that we're not. I think ice cream is a health food, okay? Mental health, maybe, whatever. But no, I won't go there. I won't even say it. But yeah, that was just so not interesting. So I really had to work that. So charming, yeah.
that's good, Jeni, because I have to say, I first heard about Jeni and I just thought, oh, another person making some kind of goofy ice creams, you know. To me, ice creams are best, you know, there's only one ice cream, and that's just the cream and the sweetener. You know, you can call it vanilla, but you don't really have to put vanilla in it if you got good dairy ingredients. It's frozen cream. But I didn't know any part of it until I met Jeni, and right away I knew I was having the privilege of sharing space with an extraordinary person who shared the passion. You know, I think you know that the word passion is tough. You know, I think of Lucinda Williams, who I just saw a few weeks ago down at Nelsonville Music Festival. You know, passionate kisses. You know. I need a rock and roll band and passionate kisses. And so I think that we look around, and passion is what we all want. Passion is connected closely with another P word, which is purpose. You know, I wasn't too interested in ice cream because there was no good milk and I was so focused on milk. But Jeni turned me around in a heartbeat. And the privilege of working with her, for the organization, for the group that she's put together doing what she's doing, is just extraordinary. I'd never imagined a partnership. In thinking about doing the creamery, which I did for years, and in the end it was the ultimate gamble of being risking everything I had in the world to start a creamery. But never having thought about ice cream, having Jeni appear out of nowhere was wonderful. My father taught me to make ice cream, hand ice cream, when I was about 8 years old, and it was a family ritual. And I left Ohio when I graduated college and moved out to the San Francisco Bay Area. I made ice cream every weekend on my porch out there with whatever fresh fruit was cheap at the supermarket and overripe. You know, ice cream was something that was very near and dear to me that I had lost track of over the last few decades. And Jeni reintroduced me to it. And I think this is a profound comment about what we need to do. You know, we have this American independence. I'm afraid that part of the news of the future in terms of local food is you have to give yourself over. I don't want to say to communism, but to your community. And so Jeni gave me a great gift in reawakening something that I had forgotten and allowing me late in my life to refocus on something that was really precious and special to me. And I think this is so much what food is about. I think there's more stories for all of us in food than in anything else. And this is the way that cultures, this is the way that intimacy, this is the way that love and care has been passed on to everyone. A child dies or a grandmother dies, and what do? You take someone food. What are you really doing? How many chances do you get to do this today? What do? Go somewhere and get, go to Whole Foods and get some prepared food and take it to them? It's the making of the food that makes it what it is. Partnering with Jeni is something that is a privilege because she brings this care to everything she does. I think this is the message that we all have to realize here about everything we do. Anything, but most especially food.
I love it when you do that. So Warren and I have this thing, like it's almost like the taste great, less filling. So Warren, grass-pastured milk and cream has a lot more have CLAs, DHAs, all these great nutrients that you don't get in milk that's conventional milk. And so when we can stand in the grocery store together, it's really fun because all of those things have flavor. And that's why I want to buy that milk, because if we're going to make the best ice cream that ever existed in the history of mankind, then we have to start, and which we don't do right now. We're going to be doing this. I mean, we're going to get better every single day. Or maybe we don't, but anyway, we're going to get better every single day. But we have to start with this beautiful ingredients, and you have to know the people who are growing these things. And of course, if you're an ice cream maker, it all has to start with grass.
And I think you guys both describe just a perfect relationship as it relates to local food, and that we need each other, and that we need to build relationships, and we need to build contacts, and we need to talk to each other and learn from each other and see how we can bring people along. And I think Jeni's done a great job of that, of spotlighting other artisans and other farms and being able to help elevate what they're doing also. And Michael, you've done a really great job in the community on your advocacy work and on, connecting the community around the subject of local food. And maybe you could talk for a minute about some of those partnerships and what they've meant for local matters and some of the things that have been able to be accomplished through your work.
Well, I'm going to make this brief because, frankly, I want to hear some of your stories and I want to hear some of your questions. And again, it's big, wide territory. But I'm going to be like the politician here, and instead of answering the question I was asked, I'm going to answer the question I wish was asked.
Oh, great.
Partly because, another level of this that I want to share, because it's really a big part of the work of Local Matters, is an area that we refer to as food justice. And I think it's another aspect of this, of how do you take this beautiful conversation that we're having about what's done on farms and these great ingredients and the desire to cook and the desire to have this really delicious and flavorful food. How do you take that same opportunity and share it equally in communities? And I think that's really one of the pieces that we spend a lot of our time thinking about at Local Matters, and we've tried many different strategies to make that happen. And we've also tried to have conversations with people about many of those strategies, frankly, that we think don't work. One of them, in my opinion, is, let's create a farmer's market in a community of need. You know, it's trying to mash together what seems like two great concepts often, where you have farmers who are doing some great things and selling some great food, and you have a community that often doesn't have access to local food, so why not put them together? Part of the logic, or the illogic of that to me, is you have farmers who are really trying to make as much money, real money, on their product as they can, and they should. They deserve every penny of it. You have a community in need that has limited resources, so when you start putting those things together, maybe they're a good fit, maybe they're not. So one of the things we've been really looking at is what are some of those strategies that we can apply that really start to make local food or even healthier foods available in many of the communities in need. We've tried a veggie van. It's one of our programs at Local Matters. It's a mobile market that takes bags of fresh, healthy food out into communities of need. Sounds like a great concept, right? If you don't have a grocery store, this van that rolls through your community that kind of looks like the ice cream truck, but it's got vegetables painted on the side, sounds like a good thing. And for the most part, it can be, but to us, it's not really a solution. It's just a Band-Aid. So I often refer to it as, if you see the van driving through a community, it should have a white flag on it, because the community is pretty close to surrendering any notion of having an equal opportunity to much of what we're talking about tonight. So I share this because I think it just opens up a broader conversation for us to be having relative to food and our food system is, what are those things that we can begin to do that create these opportunities so that everybody in the community can eat healthy local food? Because frankly, one of the beliefs that we have is everybody deserves that right. I mean, shouldn't that be one of those big human rights things that we write up on the side of the wall? So just some more food for thought, no pun intended, as we're starting to get into some of the question side of this evening.
Kind of answered my question. I asked about relationships and you talked about them, the ones we need to make between communities. So thank you for that.
Sure.
So, see, I'm going to go back to you for a second, Warren, then I'm going to go back to Ben for a second. But I think there's amazing things happening down in Athens when we're on this topic of what are opportunities and what has an area that had some economic difficulties been able to achieve around food. And so can you tell us a little bit about your backyard, from Kip's High Tunnels to Pawpaws to Au Chocolat to all the businesses that have been able to grow down in the southern part of our state, and a little bit about how that's all happened?
You bet. Thanks, Tricia, because we're getting some recognition. People tell me how wonderful Snowville is, and I try to explain that we're really a product of the community that we were relatively late arrivers in. I showed up there 18 years ago, and there was a thriving community, a thriving food community. And if you go back 100 years, there were more intentional communities in the Athens area than anywhere in the world. I don't know if it's something in the water or what it is down there. There's also, where I live out in the country, I could shoot arrows between the Indian mounds that are down there. And this is the place where people live densely in communities going back how many thousands of years. So I don't know what it is, Tricia, but there's something going on down there in Athens. And it started with a farm market about 35 years ago, I think it's been. And Kip and Becky are a glorious example. They've been a couple of decades now back in Athens. They've got a dozen high tunnels where they grow 300 to 500 pounds of produce every week in the winter with no supplemental heating. They've been doing it for a decade. They've been putting on more people. They've been putting on more tunnels. And all they want to do right now is teach what they know. And if you ever want a good thing to do, wake up on Saturday morning about 7 o'clock, jump in your car and come to Athens and be there when the bell rings at 10 o'clock in the morning. It's one of the most extraordinary farm markets in all of America. And it's just a little sliver, just peeking through a keyhole down upon your knees into what is a much larger, whole integrated community. When my wife Victoria and I started the creamery, we knew that if it failed, we would have nothing. Think about that. 60 years old and nothing. I mean, nothing. How could we do this? We did it because we knew we were in a community where we would never want for anything, because we were living in the glow of our loving friends who would never let us go without a meal or a roof over our heads, and it gave us the freedom to take that leap. We support each other down there in every way. We're close-knit, we're geographically close, geographically close, and we're all committed to each other. And now, we're talking, we need a semi-truck. Our Snowville Creamery truck got busted going across the scales between Cincinnati and Columbus last night. We weren't overweight, but we were unbalanced on two of the axles. We need a bigger truck. So this is the dilemma we are in. In Athens, we have dozens of individual entrepreneurs who have been encouraged and emboldened by the other people in their community and by the support structure that is there to go ahead and take the leap and do great things. And is that a good answer, Tricia?
It's a good answer.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to let Ben have one last go around with why he loves this work, and then we're going to open it up for questions. Okay? I think you tried to think, Ben.
Really, I would say it depends. I am a seasonal creature. Everyone wants to be seasonal eaters, seasonal this. I am a seasonal creature. My vocation is seasonal. And you just happen to catch me at the wrong season. Farmers are eternally optimistic. When I no longer get excited about getting into fields in spring, I will quit. That is a good way. Farmers are eternally optimistic creatures. If not, we would not roll the dice every year. This year is a great example. We had a very dry period, and now we're experiencing a very wet period. I just heard from a grain farmer. He has corn sprouting on the cob. That is not a good thing, by the way. I know sprouts are good on your salad and stuff, not on your ears of corn. That it just depends on where you are in the season. I look forward, our ewes are halfway through their gestation. We'll begin lambing at the end of December, beginning of January. I have a optimism I will be out there on New Year's having lambs. That is to allude to certain negativities, which I will express from time to time. I still embody think of all the agrarian writers I'm sure you've read in courses and things like that. There is nothing better than to be in a barn. As someone, a produce and livestock farmer, there is something deeply rooted in husbandry. And that's something that we are missing. It's also something that I firmly believe in an era that lacks some agricultural literacy. To raise produce needs to be in a symbiotic relationship with a ruminant animal. The most fertile ecosystems in this world pass through the digestive systems of ruminant animals. That is one thing we cannot get away from. It is, I believe from my time here in environmental studies, environmentalism is participatory. You do not become an environmentalist through the windows of a car or at the end of a pole. You get dirty.
Great, that's a good.
I don't think that farming sounds all that different from being an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that, I grew up also, not on a farm, but around farms. And it's all hard. I mean, if you're doing something interesting, it's going to be hard. It's going to be. But I always think you don't want the job that you go to from 9 to 5 and are excited to get home. You want the job that's that invades your life. That's the job you want. I mean, it's hard.
Yeah,
but I don't know. I feel like that's what passion is that sort of.
The challenge of where we are in relation to farms and local food, however, is that as local food becomes the movement or topic du jour, there has been, I don't know if we're going to get to this, but I said one of the challenges of local food is that we're beginning to mimic the conventional food system. And one of the first indictments of the conventional food system that I remember learning about is the ever diminishing portion of the consumer dollar that the farmer gets. As local food gets more popular, we are attracting more people who want to be part of the movement, and more people who want to get their part, their piece of the pie, of the consumer dollar. And we are seeing that both with our cheese and with produce in things like restaurant marketing, especially where we're not the end seller, like at a farmer's market or CSA. We are getting an increasingly small portion of the consumer dollar. That's something for the social inertia to continue, that's something that needs to be remedied. As we grow from a small direct market farm into a more medium with a further reach, we can't get that less share of the consumer dollar and still afford to buy the land. I always say, if you can't afford to pay your bills as a farmer, I don't care about whether you're certified organic or not, whether you do crop rotations, all this stuff. If you can't afford to pay your bills, you're not sustainable, period. Boom.
Good, very good point. Very good point. And as you can see, we've touched on a lot of things tonight, and we could go so much deeper into so many different subjects, but this is just at least a place to start the conversation. So let's hear from some of the people in the audience. What could we direct some questions? Go ahead.
Mr. Jones, you kind of alluded to this, but there's so much hype about eating organic and eating local, but there's also so much poverty in this country and not a lot of access for them to this food. You mentioned like the vegetable truck, playing off the ice cream truck, and that's one way to get this food to them. But in a country where we're struggling to get some of the lowest level of poverty, people living in poverty, to get away from McDonald's and even go to a real grocery store like Kroger and get food, how are we expecting these people to buy local and buy organic all the time? Like, I know for me, it's kind of a special treat if I get to go to a farmer's market or a Whole Food store and buy that food. But if you're asking people to make the switch entirely, and I see the benefits of it, and it's not that I'm against that, but how is it more accessible on a daily basis for people to eat local food, local farms and local dairies and have this extraordinary ice cream, which is delicious, by the way, I had it for the first time.
Thank you.
But how do those things become more accessible?
Great question. Strategy, I think, is one way is one of the places where I would begin. I could argue on the deeper level that until we flip the pyramid that right now is 1%, 99% in terms of how we distribute income in the country, we're going to continue to have to come up with some pretty incredible strategies to make it work. I can share with you relative to the question about organic and local in communities of need. When we do our work, local and organic really isn't the place that we start. We usually start with something healthier than a bag of chips, a soda, or a Twinkie. And so, there are a lot of other options that we can look at in that respect. The other opportunities for community members are, we have a program called Growing Matters, for example. So we have a yard garden program. So it was phenomenal to us to see the number of people that were interested in learning to grow their own food right in their backyard. And they weren't so interested, for example, in doing that in a community garden. They really wanted it in my backyard so I can step out on my steps and pick whatever it is that I've grown. And the beautiful thing about that is you can plant a 10 by 10 garden, for example, and produce 400 or 500 pounds of fresh fruits and vegetables. So I think that's one of the ways that we would approach, that opportunity for access. Another one is a project that we're working on right now in Columbus, on the Near East Side, where our office is located. We had some community members who came to us back in the spring of 2011 and said, you know what, we're part of those people that most folks would say they don't want healthy food, they won't eat healthy food, why are you bothering? This was a group of African American women who had put together a buying club of about 60 people, and they were pooling their resources because they absolutely wanted to get something that was healthy, nutritious, and they were really interested in organic, and they would spend all of their resources to get it. So they approached us and said, we're tired of just doing a buying club in our house, we want a retail store, can you help us? So together we were able to secure some resources, and right now are in the final stage of working with them to open a cooperative grocery store in the community. So that's another strategy relative to, in terms of that collective buying and being able to price things in such a way that you can make that, healthy, local, and affordable food available to communities in need. So just another example of how that can be done. And then certainly the other is starting to look at some, again, some of the broader issues of economic development and income redistribution, whatever that's going to end up looking like. That help?
Yeah, thank you.
Sure.
It's a great question. Go ahead.
Yeah, I have two questions for Warren Taylor. Number one, I think you're pretty passionate about milk. And I just wondered, do you like whole milk, skim milk, 2%?
Do you believe in God?
I'm guessing that's whole milk.
Yes.
I have another question for you. This is a serious one. You mentioned before that milk is something about the milk is we wouldn't be here without milk. I think is what you said. And what do you say to the vegans in the room for that?
Well, I think this whole thing about milk, I think the first thing to understand is, let's get to the facts. I'm an engineer, I'm a scientist type. More people in traditional diets consume milk than consume rice. More people in traditional diets consume milk than consume wheat. So let's start by understanding that milk is statistically the most ubiquitous, the most common single food in the human diet in the world. So before we have any discussions about, whatever's right or wrong, let's get that fact out right away. Secondly, all this talk about lactose intolerance is a relatively new phenomena where we're drinking sweet, fresh, cold milk. Traditionally, people took milk out of the cow and it's soured. It's soured because microorganisms were consuming the lactose and turning it into lactic acid. And in doing that, it lowered the pH or raised the acidity of the milk to below pH 4.2, which is about where disease-causing organisms can grow. So the history of milk is the history of a very wonderful coincidence that in its natural situation, it ferments. It ferments, and in fermenting, it actually removes the lactose and it makes it unavailable for disease-causing organisms to grow in it. This is the history of milk. The last 50 years is simply a blip. So I would say that I believe that Homo sapiens developed because, for the first time in human history, we had milk for our children, for our adolescents, for our young mothers, for our men going out and working or hunting, for our older people when we lived in communities. And every community, in every society where there were lactating mammals, consumed milk, every single one. Because it was the first time in human history that we could have protein without chasing something down and killing it. And I believe that Homo sapiens only exist because of milk. Our brain size, our stature, our longevity is the result of milk. So you have to understand that you're not dealing with someone who looks at this thing the way most people do. So secondly, I appreciate the vegan perspective. I was a vegetarian when I was a young hippie in my 20s. I went to San Francisco, I started doing Kung Fu and Tai Chi, and the Chinese I was studying under, we would take them to lunch in Chinatown, and they would order for you based on what you needed to eat. Kidneys, lungs, brains, tendons. And if you said, "Oh, sorry, master, I'm a vegan," or a vegetarian, he wouldn't have understood any more than when he showed you how to punch or stand, you did it some different way. So I was saved from vegetarian by my interest in pursuing Kung Fu, doing Tai Chi. But I find a parallel, I think, and I hope I don't offend anybody here because I don't mean to, but I think everything we're talking about here tonight is about consciousness. Everything is about consciousness. And I remember being absolutely abhorrent in the 1980s when every PhD women's studies program in the world taught as catechism that men and women were really the same. And that if you gave girls trucks and boys dresses, you wouldn't know the difference. Anybody who's raised animals, dogs, chickens, cows, you know that men and women are very different. And it's bullshit that they're the same.
Do we have time for another?
And so I believe that there's a problem between people thinking what intellectually they think the world should be as compared to people observing the world and seeing what it is. Is that a fair answer?
I'll just say that sheep were actually the primary dairy animal before cows in Europe, and they only lost that status during the time of the bubonic plagues because of a labor shortage.
Thank you, Ben.
That's good hysterical.
See, we have
historical.
We have so much knowledge up here. Okay, go ahead. The gentleman who's at the mic.
Hi there. Okay, so we've talked about a lot of big ideas today, and I think that's great. But to me, I'd like to kind of get at something that's a little more practical. And so I guess my question is, for all of you, and I hope that each of you will answer, what can I personally do tomorrow, or the next day, or next week? What can I personally do? What can we all personally do over the next few weeks?
It's perfect. You just said my closing line. Okay. You want to start, Jeni?
I had a flu last week, so I was in bed for 2 days, and one thing I did was watch TED Talks all day long, which was awesome. So there are a ton of really inspiring, really great TED Talks that will get you off your chair when it comes to the whole food system and a lot of these things. And it's great, and they're very, very specific. So everyone from Mark Bittman, Jamie Oliver has a great one, Dan Barber, who's a famous chef, of course Michael Pollan, and on, but just type that in and go. There's lots of books. I'd like to hear what everybody's reading, or what your favorite books are about this too. But I think getting knowledge and not stopping, but continuing to fill yourself up with knowledge. And then of course it doesn't matter unless you actually get off your chair and you're activated to do something. And I would always say, of course, you need to start a business, because I think business is the fastest way to make any change. We can't wait for government. We can't wait for our universities, which are all awesome, or whatever. I think business is a great thing to do. Of course, you're going to make a living, but you can make lots of change, and there are so many opportunities for food because nobody knows what's going on with food anymore. People can't figure out what to cook at home in every community. And we grow food in Ohio. That's what we do. I mean, everybody talks about tech and bringing in all these things and doing what other cities are doing. I'm like, we're in the middle of flavor. Ohio grows flavor. We are a top 5 state for soil. We need to embrace that and take the reins and do that. Anyway, you can start a business, and you can do that right now.
That's great. Ben, do you want to add to that? Anything that you think the audience could do right now to get involved?
The simplest thing, if you have concern about local food, local economies, buy local food. It's really simple. And what we need in local food and at our farmers markets, we do not need fair weather patrons.
Come out when it's raining.
Come out when it's raining.
Come out when it's cold.
Come out when Comfest is going on. When the Buckeye we always find it's very interesting that there's this great thing in Columbus, the community festival. That is our lowest farmers market of the year by 25%. So vote with your dollars, buy food, learn about farms. Agricultural literacy is at an all-time low. Maybe work on some farms, maybe work on a farm and decide you want to farm for a living.
And I would say too, from getting to know a lot of our local farmers, that they're very great mentors, have had open doors, open hearts, and some of them have wanted to retire and said that one person walked through their door that made them not want to retire because they just wanted to show them what they'd learned. And so, I think that if you are interested in that, there's a lot of resources we could connect you with. So go ahead, Warren. One thought of what students could do today.
Michael, go ahead.
I was going in order, but go ahead.
Okay. Sorry, I was just sitting here knowing I was going to have 5 or 6 minutes to prepare my answer. Warren was going next. I guess I would go back and visit where I started with you in terms of I think you have to go in there and find out what your passion is and then connect your passion to food or food system. Frankly, because there's so many different ways you can get involved. Certainly purchasing local food and voting with your dollar is one of the best and one of the easiest, because frankly it starts to make you think about where your food comes from. And for me, I know when I talk to audiences a lot and I ask that question of, when you sit down and you have a meal, how many of you think about where that food on your plate actually came from? And it's rare that I get that many hands up in a room. We've become so conditioned to just eating like machines. So I certainly think that's a simple thing. Starting a business is another great idea, because there's so much room right now in this food system work for entrepreneurs and thinkers, and it doesn't need to be a Fortune 500 company. There's some beautiful places to jump in given the needs. There's other simple things like grow some yourself. Maybe you're not going to become a farmer because that's not your passion, but you can certainly put some seeds in a pot and put them out in your windowsill right here on the university campus. That's a great way to get involved. Grow a garden, whatever it is. Learn to cook. I mean, I'm a chef, and I got to be honest with you. There's at least 2 generations or more, I don't know, of folks that don't even know how to cook anymore. I mentioned my 6.5-year-old daughter who's in school right now, and if I had my way, there would be 2 things that would be reinstituted at school. One of them is home ec, and the other is playground time and more of it. Because when you talk about that connection to obesity, diabetes, etc., I mean, those are easy ones for me. So again, so many different things that you could do, and they don't have to be save the world kind of things. Many of the simple gestures that you do when they're done collectively and consciously make such a huge difference.
So I'm a save the world kind of guy. So much as I love Michael, so I'd say real simple. This is an election year. How many of you are really pissed that we're the only representative democracy in the entire world that doesn't mandate GMO labeling of our food? So if you're pissed, you write the people that are asking for your vote and ask them what they're going to do for the next 2 years in office. If you want a democracy, the most The most powerful force in food in America today is our government. And they're controlled by Monsanto and God knows what else. If we don't take our government back, all of our local food efforts are lost. Take political power. And you can't do it by writing a check to somebody. You do it by grabbing your politician by the throat. And you can't grab Mitt or Barack by the throat. There are 15 people going to be elected from the state of Ohio, 15. And they're going to go to Congress in Washington, D.C. And they're the same people who allowed the Halliburton-Cheney exemption that exempted gas and oil exploration in America from any environmental regulation. They're the same people that allowed GMO labeling to go undone in this country. You ask them that question. You ask them and the people that are running against them, and you decide what you're going to do in the next 4 weeks. Get politically active right now, and get ready over the next 2 years to get your local leaders, your local food people, the people you care about, get them committed to go to Washington, D.C. And let's create a political movement in this country that refuses to elect anybody who takes money from big business and rich people. Let's get back to citizen finance campaigns in this country. We can never beat Monsanto with money. We have a democracy in this country, and when people are dying in the streets of Syria to have a fraction of what we have, and we're not using what we have, shame on us. We don't have GMO labeling in this country because we haven't taken it. Take it.
I think we're out of time. Are we out of time, Chris? Yeah. So I think that's a great. I was going to end with some Ohio and entrepreneurial trivia, but I feel like it's kind of a letdown after but I'm just going to end with it anyways because it's kind of fun. So anyways, I was researching references to entrepreneurs and food in Ohio in the early days, and here's some things I learned. That English travelers came to Ohio and wrote letters back to England referring to Ohio as Porkopolis. Our most famous early resident in 1801 was Johnny Appleseed, aka Johnny Chapman, a fine man that was referred to as the orchard evangelist. His business was to spread the delights of growing apple trees by seed to the new frontier. In 1800s, there are references to tomatoes, calling them love apples. And in 1842, in the great state of Ohio, champagne was made by accident by Nicholas Longworth, named affectionately Catawba wine. The connections between our land, our spirit, our traditions at the table, and the entrepreneurial pursuits have been firmly rooted in our state from the beginning. Let them continue. Thanks to everybody that came out tonight. Thank you, Chris.
Y'all bring out the best in us. Thank you.